Yeah, since we started. Let me share my screen and take you through today's topics. As you know, this is part 4 and 5 in the series of talks. I guess most of the things we are going to be mentioning as first techniques and framework ideas is already well known by anyone or everyone in the team. But I wanted to make sure that we are looking for these resources in the correct place, and when we add more resources, more services, or more identifiers, we know how to introduce that in kind of the modern approach. Because obviously there's many ways to create states, many ways to create services, and also same with identifiers. And I wanted to just highlight what I think are the best techniques for doing this. So let's go to the first, which is states and services. So when I think about states and services, they are kind of the same thing in that they are often globally accessible resources. The difference is that states should be considered a data model only, and there shouldn't be any logic to the states. In fact, you should actually make sure that when you access states and you set states, these are done without actually too many side effects. Ideally, there should be no side effects. So basically, the state should be immutable and should be treated as such. And when I initially introduced states in Adrega, we were kind of moving away from having static global values into more like a managed state engine. And at that time, it was 2016, I think. I was searching the net and I found this software pattern called Redux. And I was quite intrigued. It seemed to be very popular, especially in web creation, web clients. And it so happened that there were one implementation in .NET called Redux.NET that I came across, which I introduced into Adrega. Unfortunately, I would say the creator of this .NET implementation retired the solution, so he doesn't actually commit any changes to it, and hasn't done that since 2017. The good thing is that it's a simple API, and I think it's been working well for us until now. At least when I search for performance issues, it's never been the case that the state management code has been flagged as being resource wasting. So, but at the same time, it's a bit of a discouragement. It's not good, actually. We are using a third-party component which is no longer maintained. I did check just before this meeting what else is available for .NET, and there's something called Redux Simple, which seems to have maybe even better API that we can use, which we should consider moving to. I don't think we need to consider to do that in desktop, but of course we will be using .NET in the backend for quite some time going forward. So it might be that we should convert into this new state machine. So that's something I will consider adding into the framework eventually. I don't think this will be happening for 5.5, the current developed release, but I think as soon as we're finished with that, I will see what it will be involving in moving over to the Redux Simple solution. As far as the TypeScript solution, we are using Redux JS. It is a very good and documented system. I was a bit surprised actually when I checked this a few weeks ago or a month ago. They no longer actually suggest that we follow the original implementation or the original API. So if we go to the old way we used to register services, then the way we're doing it is actually discouraged now. It's marked as obsoleted. That was quite interesting actually to see. So I've already put in place in the TypeScript code some use case of the new solution, and it so happens that the new solution is just an more formal use of the old API, and they added some helper classes and helper API elements, which makes it simpler to understand, I would say. So, but I'll show you some examples on this later on. As far as services, I don't think we need to talk about so much about which third-party component we are using. The only thing we are using is on the C# side. We are using a service locator for services. In Angular, this is actually inherited to the framework by the injectable tag. So there's no equivalent of service locator in Angular as such. But actually, I created a convenience class or service, I would say, called service locator service, which is kind of a collection of other services. Because I found that as we are constantly adding more services in Angular, the constructor function for many of the components which are using many of these new services is getting quite large when you talk about number of inputs or parameters. So I wanted to reduce number of parameters needed for these constructors. So I will show an example on this. So in fact, let me go through the examples actually, because that might be good for the background. So this is an example on how you would address or get access to the user ID. So for the running session, so this is valid in the client code. It is not valid in the server code, because the server code can be used by many different users, and of course all of these users will be sharing the same runtime, so you wouldn't be accessing the currently logged in user this way, because the service is kind of not logged in. So often you would see that if you access the user UID or ID in the service, it will be part of the input to the service. Now, as far as TypeScript, so this is an equivalent of getting the currently logged in ID for the user. The new syntax looks a bit similar, but notice the use of value. This is important. So this is a reference to the item, but it's actually the value that you're using. And this is part of the Redux toolkit. So if you click on this link, you will understand more about why this is needed if you wonder about this. I do encourage you guys to actually look up all the external links that I put in these seminars notes, because that will give you kind of extensive knowledge about these third-party APIs that we are using. So this is accessing the store. How you put changes into the store is like this. So basically in C# you would be dispatching some action, and action would often be changing the store. And this is the way we would do it in TypeScript. Let me just split the TypeScript samples. So you have the old syntax, which always references the type like this, and that is not needed actually by the new syntax. The type is inherent to this constructor or invocation, I would say. So I think it's actually quite easier to read. And that's actually the benefit with using Redux Toolkit API, is that the code is easier to understand and is easier to maintain as well. So as far as calling on services, in C#, both on the server side and also in the client code, you would be calling on this get instance of, which will return an interface for the service, and then you invoke on that. As I said, I created a service for this, doing much the same thing as we have here. So you actually don't need to inject the service into the constructor of your control elements anymore. It's actually already initialized as part of this global instance. So you don't even need to have it as a part of the constructor. You can actually access it like this. So yeah, it's quite convenient, actually, I think. So let's take a look at some code. Let's go to C# first. So this is the main entry point for the C# services. You will notice that we use Redux library. This is actually initially downloaded from NuGet, but unfortunately the DLL that we got from NuGet was not signed. So to create a desktop client which we can package in click once, we need to make sure that all the DLLs are signed. So what I did locally is I signed this DLL with our own certificate. So this is why also it's a bit inconvenient to download a new version of this and put it into our system. But of course, as I said, this hasn't been updated since 2017, so yeah, it's not a problem. But just be aware that if you should try to use this by updating it from NuGet, then you will get a compilation warning eventually. Yeah. So I don't think we need to go through the details. It has a dispatch function. It has a store. What you might find interesting actually is a store state. If you wonder about what is stored in our application on the state, then this would be a good place to look for that. So for instance, user is in the Adrega store state. So everything on the store in the global storage could be found in this class here. Okay, so let's see what else. Service locator is also part of the C#. You would see that I recently moved it to another library. It was used to be part of the core library, but I tried to extract out of the core library, which is now very extensive and contains everything, into more dedicated DLLs. So this happened that I needed to remove this service locator as well. The service locator itself is not dependent on anything, I think. Just check now. It has no usage on top. So this is implementation we created ourselves, but basically is based on a code template we got very many years ago from Microsoft's own developer site, I believe. It is actually quite interesting to know how we call it bootstrap the services. There needs to be some logic to put services into the expected locations, and so what we have created is bootstrap service. So if I look to the implementation for this, you will see that we have one for planner and we have one for the backend. There's also one which is not formally declared from this, which is part of the unit test. And there's also one additional one in the backend. So I think I should go back and clean this up so that all the Bootstrap processes in different runtimes is derived from this one. But anyway, if you go to the desktop client one, this is the other planned desktop client, you would see all the formal declarations of the services that we have on the C#. So basically this is more or less a complete list of services that we can access in C#. If you look to same kind of structure in TypeScript, it would be this file, which is very central. So basically this is a marriage between the old Redux implementation represented by this class, but also the new elements. So I created so far 4 new state elements. So one is the datetime format you would see here. I don't think we need to go into the details about the implementation, but just know that if you wanted to add more states in the store, state storage, then you would be following the new pattern, certainly. So, for instance, this is how the datetime format looks. And let's see here. It's actually implementation. I wanted to show you this. This is the actual implementation for datetime storage. So it follows a given pattern that you find when you look to the documentation on Redux Toolkit. But basically, this is the pattern that you need to follow to implement the states. So let's go to the service locator service. You can easily see that so now I've joined up these commonly used services. So I established like field service, view service, user service, project activity, entity map, Gantt, and column editor service. All of these services are, I would say, part of the new framework. And as such, I do encourage you to make yourself familiar with this functionality of these services. But there's also exists a large number of older services, which are part of the old data model and old field model, which is something. Once we have introduced and recoded everything to the new, then of course we are in a state where we can actually remove the old services, and that's something I think we should do eventually, but certainly not within the current 5.5 development cycle. Now I think we need to just live with the fact that in services and in the global state, we are going to use a mix of the old coding patterns and the new ones. But just please make sure that you are using the new coding patterns as much as possible if you wanted to add new elements. Yeah, and of course, always, if you have any questions on how to introduce services or states, and you can't actually find the answer by looking at the code, then please just contact me and I can walk you through this. Yeah, there's no equivalent of bootstrapping in Angular, as I said, because we have the injectables. So basically, this service is actually initialized as part of the creation of the web page. And as you can see here, once this service is constructed, these services are also constructed and they're put into this global instance scope. So I think that's everything I had to say about the states and services. Are there any questions or comments?
I have a question, but maybe it's just because I don't understand how this works quite. You In the beginning, you talked about some examples on how to get user ID.
Yeah.
Yes, there it is, old and new. I don't. Maybe I just don't understand the convention, but for the old way, it's quite understandable to me that you want to get the user's ID. But in the new way, selected projects dot value, will that return user ID?
No. This is an array of integer or number values. I haven't reproduced the old user
okay,
ID.
Okay, you just took another example. Okay, then
Yes.
then I get it. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering if I was completely confused here. Okay, then I have no questions.
Any other questions? No. In that case, let's already spent half an hour about this. Let's go with unique identifiers, and it might be surprised to why I even have this as a separate chapter. You might think, what's the deal with the unique identifiers? Aren't they just given? And when you start trying to generalize our data models, you soon realize that one trait of these models is that they are often identified by their unique identifiers. And then if you go back into Adrega and study the number of different approaches to identifiers, you might be surprised, because there are so many different choices to what should be an identifier, what should be the key value for data record. And that's a bit unfortunate. And I think it's very good that we can talk about this now and try to come up with a modern approach, the approach that we should use when we introduce new data records, which needs to be referenced by a unique key. And so traditionally, the main method of identifying a record is, by the way, many of these types resides also in the database. So you would see that it's basically the database implementation which dictates how the runtime, the C# code, the TypeScript code should handle and generate the identifiers. So just keep that in mind, that often the overruling party is the SQL implementation. You can't actually change it easily, or you shouldn't change it in code. You should keep true as much as possible to the way it's set up in SQL. Anyway, so in SQL, you would see that we have these unique numbers. So by the way, I'm using a new syntax. Maybe you haven't seen this before. So this is the name of the SQL table, and this would be the name of the column name. So basically, this is the AD project table in the database, and this is a column in the AD project table. And this project ID is sufficiently unique that this is the primary key for this table entries. You have the same unique identifier for timesheets. In some tables, we use a string text as a unique identifier. So AD language expressions XBOD would be an example of that. Also, we have two types of unique identifiers. In the database, they will always be referenced to as unique identifier. In the C# code, they will always be referenced to as UID. But there is a way to construct UID or unique identifiers, which would a better name it to be comb, basically. I haven't found out why they're using this comb abbreviation for it. But I inherited it from the code and the articles I found online. But I'll talk more about that afterwards. So there's also not only the type which distinguishes an identifier, but also it's important to know how they are generated. And there's basically 3 ways we generate identifiers. Actually, there's 4, because I haven't mentioned how we generate unique entries for text. But that is very dedicated to the specific table, and isn't something that we are kind of generating. It's something that it's quite kind of manual input. For number values, we have 2 ways of doing that. One is to have the database generate it for us. So let me show you an example on this. Let me go here. You'll find that if you have installed Radar, and I hope everyone has that now, it has a very nice database integration as well. What you would do is that you go to plus, and then you say data source and Microsoft SQL Server. Then you just say that you want Windows credentials if you're looking towards running against a local database, and then you enter the database name. So you can actually, I think the pull down should work. You can see here. So these are all the databases I've installed locally. And if you press on OK, you will get it added to the list that you see here. So I talked about some identifiers being generated by the SQL. And it's actually sometimes difficult to understand if it's the case or not. So one thing you can do is to run a script like I have here. It will ask SQL itself for the column key entries in the database, and you will get a list like this. You have the table name, the column name. All of these are key values. But not everyone is set up to be identity. So if I look on the right side here, I can sort by. You can see all of these cases are identity marked ones. So if I should be able to find sheet UID somewhere here, I believe. Sorry, that I scrolled too far. Sheet UID like this. So another way to actually identify that would be to go to the tables. And look at the definition, and you can see that the timesheet UID property is set to be identity. And a disadvantage with this approach is that you need actually to put the record into the database to receive from the database the proper identity. So there's no way to ahead of time give it a unique identity. You actually need support from the database to generate that. So that's why I don't like myself to have the identity flag set in the database. But it doesn't actually help too much, even though it's not set in the database. If you look to see how we generated project UID values, it's by taking the maximum value of the project UID in the database and adding 1 to it. And of course, that means that you need to query the database as you're adding the record to the database, because as you know, the database is shared between many users. So if there's 2 users now in adding projects to the database, you want to make sure that they don't end up using the same ID for the newly introduced project, right? So this makes more sense, I think, in that theoretically, you don't actually need to ask the database for the identity. The database is happy to use whatever you use it and give it. But at the same time, since it's based on maximum search, it also requires that you query the database as you are introducing the record. And so that's why I don't actually like unique identifiers based on numbers. What I do like, though, is identifiers based on GUID unique identifiers. Basically, when you create a global identifier like this, you can create it on the client side, and it will be unique as you introduce this key into the database. You can create it on the server side, it will be unique. You can create it even in SQL, and it will be unique. So basically, you allow the ability to create the new identifiers anywhere at any one time. And this makes it much more simple, because if you generate it on the client side, you pass it to the database, and you don't need feedback from the database to what key it was going to be stored under. If you use the old, I would say the old way with max and identity, as you introduce new records in the database from the client needs to be updating its own temporary key with the one that is actually generated and put into the database. So it means that it needs to be a two-way data flow. You can't actually just send off data to the database and register it in the database. You need actually to wait until the database gives you information about what key it was using. Now, there is a disadvantage with using GUID values in databases. I wouldn't say it's a problem when using it in runtime, because it's only mainly uses it in a hash table and doesn't have the same problem. But in a database, there's a overhead since the GUID values is actually purely random. There's no incremental approach to it. So if I generate one GUID now, and then I generate a GUID in 10 minutes, then the one I created in 10 minutes might not be sorted in chronological order, basically. And that has some disadvantages when using it in a rational database. So if you're interested in what a comb is, theoretically, you can just click on these articles. I will actually start clicking on this one, the latest one. And it will explain for you what a comb is. And also, I think it also will say why we will be using it. But if you wanted the full depth of the idea about comb, I would actually refer you to this original article, which was the one I read initially. And this actually introduced combs for me, and why I actually created support for it in Andrega. So given that information, I hope that everyone, when you create a new data set, you will be ending up using GUID as the key. Also, I hope that you will generate the GUID based on the comb implementations I created. So in TypeScript, I have created this function. It hasn't seen much use for now, since I don't actually create too much new entries in the web client. And also, when we do create entries, they are basically going into existing tables like user table or field table or activity table, in which case, of course, we can't use GUID. But in the future, if you are adding new data into the database, or if you are creating a data structure which isn't supposed to be a part of the database, but only stored on the server side, on the client side, I do encourage you to make use of this generate comb function to see here. And there's also one that you can see in SQL. Let's go to this file. So basically, I pressed the wrong key here. I wanted to close this page, not the entire application. Just a minute. Did it not start? Where is it? This is a bit strange. Bear with me a minute. Okay, I'll do without it now. I don't think I need it anymore. Let's just go with what we have on the screen. I'm not sure why I can't open it. It might be something to do with shared screens. I need to investigate later on. But just know then that there is a way to generate these combs, which are basically GUID, but they're generated in a special way in TypeScript, in C#, and also in SQL. But again, more than likely will be forced to use all the identifiers. So that's it as far as identifiers. Are there any questions?
Why we don't use standard functions to generate GUIDs?
Yeah. So basically, a GUID isn't well suited for rational put into the database as a key. It slows down the database generation or joins and indexes, everything that ensure that you have a good performance in the database is reduced by introducing random keys. So what COM does is that it combines the randomness of GUID with a chronological order. So basically, what you do is that you generate a GUID, then you remove parts of the GUID and you insert instead a time code on it. So basically, a comp contains the time of creation as part of the encoding. So and it doesn't make sense unless you know that the reason for doing this is that it improves quite significantly the performance of the database.
So this is for internal indexes, yeah? For searching.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes. So basically, if the key that you put into the SQL database is pure random, then it will affect the performance of many of the major SQL operations. If it's incremental in time, then these operations will complete quicker. And this article that I referred to here, it gives you some performance numbers and also explains the reason for using comps. And it's actually this guy Jim Mindalson, who back in 2012, 2002, came up with this concept. And I haven't actually checked on the latest version of SQL to see if that might be like a inherent property of when it generates unique identifiers in the database, but I haven't actually seen it so far. And I don't think there's been much attention to it. I think using GUID in databases has not been a good practice so far because of the bad performance you inherently get from them. But this article that you see here explains you how you could use GUIDs as the unique key in SQL with actually removing the database performance.
So currently we have this creating, let's say, special combination grids, we introduce this logic on all levels. So you have, let's say, 3 implementation currently, or just C# code.
So currently, we actually actively use combs in some of our database tables. So you would see that I'm referring here to the new field model. The new field model has a unique identifier for all fields. Sorry, not the new field model, it's a dynamic field model. Yes, Elena?
At current moment, if we generate a GUID, we use comb rules in all levels, in code,
Yes.
in SQL, because we some times ago was created a function for a generation GUID, and it use combination rules, and it used always where
Mhm.
ID generated, we generated.
So you can see the 3 implementations here, one in TypeScript, one in C# and one in SQL.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments?
Bernd, I would like to clarify only. I right understand that you want replace identify property on GUID. I mean table SWIFT ID with identify property on GUID.
Eventually, I would like to see if we can have some time to actually refactor the tables, even the project table, activity table, all the tables, to move away from the numbering, the numbered keys to the GUID keys. Yes. But that, of course, that will be like a technical challenge for us, because there are lots of code involved in using the old keys. So it will be a long-term coming to do that. But I think, for instance, it might be possible to do that in timesheets soon, because now I think we would have like a simplified data model for timesheets, which can be used throughout Fadrega. There's only actually in 5.5, we will be removing approve functionality from desktop, and so we don't actually need to modify many of the C# code that is used by the desktop. And of course, hopefully we will have time so that we can actually get the timesheet pages and the approve page up to the new data model. As you might know already, the quick approve data model is the new one, whereas the approve page and timesheet page currently are using the old data model. But there's no technical reason why not to move these 2 pages to the new data model as well. And once you have done that, we will have like a shared code between all elements that are handling the timesheet data flow. And at that time, it could be quite easy actually to convert from sheet to ID to a GUID in timesheets.
About timesheets, it is difficult to say. I'm not sure that we will have improvement of performance after replace, because we most quick search by number fields.
Yes, I don't say that we will have a better performance, but we will have a much easier implementation.
No, I think that let's move in time with actions. I'm sure that we should improve load of data for timesheets, because at current moment we have a huge of selection, and unfortunately performance is not good. It is correct, but replace number on GUID, I'm not sure. but this is good. It is good solution for current pages because we have not a huge data for timesheets pages. And, no, okay, it is different ways for keep data.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
mhm.
I think what we could do is actually to play with it a bit. We could see before and after such a move before we commit to actually doing the move together. So what we could do is to have a developer for a few days convert from old identifier to the new identifier and see what performance, what would happen with the performance. And of course, if the performance drops significantly um, on the actions we already need supported, then of course we would not be doing that. But I would hope to see that moving away from the number format to the com format wouldn't affect performance much. In which case, if we did this move, then it would significantly reduce the complexity in the implementation. Because now we need to send the data record, store it in the database, and then get the stored key back to the client side. And
Yes.
so that's kind of a complexity which we would remove from that solution. There's also, yes, Andreas.
Sorry. I have to remind you also that we do have an implementation from where you can transfer timesheets over to what's it called, this accounting system, Unit 4, is it? And there we transfer this ID as an identifier to link Adrega with this other system. I'm not sure if we can just change it if it allows to transfer a GUID value, just so we're aware of this.
There's also, yeah, sorry. But there is also one very, very nice fact with GUIDs. As I said, these are unique. So say that you have two customer databases filled with timesheets. And then the customer says that, hey, we want to move the timesheets from this database to this database. Is that possible? And you would have to say that, no, we can't do that. But if the database had records based on GUID and not an incremental number, then it would be trivial to do this move. And that doesn't only go with timesheets, it goes with all types of properties. It could be projects, activities, it could be field data, etc. So it makes it much more easy to export and import data into our system.
Not in our system, from our system. We export data.
Yes, but for instance, say that Primavera had identified their activities with GUID. It might be the fact they're actually doing that, but we need to convert that GUID value to our own internal value, which is the integer value, right? So we can't actually take a GUID value and insert that into our database as the key value. We need to convert it. So I think if you look to the GUID as a key, then it has so many good properties in being uniquely unique that it actually facilitates moving data into Adrega and out of Adrega. Okay, I think that's maybe sufficient. Any other comments on the identifiers? No, but hopefully you now understand why I brought this up as a separate subject. This unique identifiers is also, of course, a fact of my data models. So if I go to the next seminar, it will be on data models for tables, and unique identifiers is certainly one of the things that we will talk about how I model the data around the needs of unique identifiers. So this talk will be on Thursday, if I can get it ready. It has actually haven't created so much yet, and it's an extensive chapter, so I do hope to get some time on it, and this will be on Friday. Are there any questions? Last comments? No, in that case, I wish everyone a good day, and thanks for being patient with me today. I've spent almost an hour with you guys, so thank you for your patience, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Brand. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for seminar. Bye.
Bye bye.